America's center of power changed, and with it, the dynamics of the political landscape. The consequences will reverberate locally, in Florida, on Capitol Hill, and on the global stage. Voters demanded change on the issues that mattered most: the economy, immigration, and social issues. Now, News 4 Jax goes beyond the headlines with political analysts who provide unique context and perspective. Experts focused on the issues making headlines. This is Politics and Power.
Inauguration Day is on the horizon. January 20th, Donald Trump and his team made a series of promises that he would enact on day one in office. Among the things on the agenda: close the U.S.-Mexican border, begin what Donald Trump says will be the largest deportation program in American history, expedite permits for drilling and fracking, roll back environmental regulations, pardon people convicted of crimes related to the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, sign an executive order that would cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, CRT, transgender insanity, as he put it, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content onto the lives of our children, roll back President Biden's electric vehicle policies, enact tariffs on goods coming in from Mexico, Canada, and China, sign an executive order that would cut federal funding for any school pushing CRT, as we said, and more. No one will argue 2025 got off to a turbulent start. It leaves the president-elect having to confront a difficult opening to the second Trump presidency. As one analyst put it, he'll be confronting the kind of crises he has long been railing against. Welcome to Politics and Power. I'm Bruce Hamilton. Joining me, political analyst Daniel Cronrath. Daniel, Happy New Year. Good to have you here.
Happy New Year to you, Bruce. Thanks for having me back.
Good to be here. So the inauguration, as I said, is coming, and I started off outlining Trump's day one agenda. Going in, you have several things creating chaos. You've got the driver plowing a truck into a crowd of New Year's revelers in New Orleans, the detonation of a Tesla Cybertruck in front of the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. Oh, and the breach of the U.S. Treasury Department. That was a major cybersecurity incident, what's believed to be the hands of Chinese state-sponsored hackers. Trump uses all of this to paint a picture of a declining nation. Any doubt he's going to try to use them to force his agenda through Congress?
Well, I would say, Bruce, the one thing that we know about Donald Trump's history in the public eye and politics is he's very, very opportunistic. He finds a way to take whatever the event of the day is, what's going on, whether it be positive, whether it be tragic, as was the case with the New Year, and then he tries to find a way to integrate that into his version of Donald Trump as being the guy who can save the United States from whatever his reality, whatever your particular calamity it is taking place. Donald Trump is going to be the individual who has a solution. Relative to a lot of this tragedy, what does Donald Trump say after he comes into office? And of course, in a country, Bruce, of 330 million people, we're always going to have an event of the day, something which shocks and horrifies us, whether it's the terrible examples, as you mentioned, the two former service members who were involved in violence on New Year's, whether it's the Los Angeles wildfires, the urban wildfires in LA, which Donald Trump has been exploiting. He always finds a way to basically carve and fit that into his narrative for how he's going to solve it. What does he do after he takes office? How does he explain things away that happen after he comes into office? Well, again, the playbook's going to be that you're going to essentially, there's two things: find a situation, and then figure out who to blame. Okay, so even if Donald Trump is in office, he's going to be able to continue to perpetuate this myth that he is really the only one who can solve these situations, and that sadly America is in a state of decline. Which listen, in many ways I would agree with Donald Trump. We are a declining nation in several ways. Probably not in the ways that Donald Trump would agree with me, however, in terms of how we're actually declining.
Let's go ahead and give some things perspective here. Fact is that the president-elect's assertions about immigration and crime, considering what happened in New Orleans and Las Vegas, are in direct contrast to reality. Both suspects are U.S. citizens. Mm-hmm. Both suspects served in the United States Army, yet he used the incidents to highlight his fight against illegal immigration. When push comes to shove, will his playing with the facts matter? Because the American public seems to believe whatever he says.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. If you're a core supporter of Donald Trump, Bruce, and we've discussed this on previous episodes of Politics and Power, you're going to believe whatever the president says. He could blame this on an open border. He could blame this on communist China. It's really whatever he says, he's going to float out to his group of supporters. Now, we know in the case, as you mentioned, with these New Year's episodes, which took place, both of these individuals, by all accounts, served honorably in the military. I believe I think the individual in Las Vegas with the Tesla truck explosion, was a decorated military veteran, had received
a hero,
had received Bronze Stars for previous displays of valor. So, you know, moving forward with this, how does Donald Trump actually pivot to make these things relevant to his agenda? And I think he's just going to continue to do that skillfully, Bruce, as he's done for pretty much since he's come on the scene politically.
Why do people refuse to subscribe to reality?
Well, that's a good question, Bruce. I mean,
it was rhetorical, but, you know,
I don't know. You know, Donald Trump, again, is the individual who he himself said he could go out into the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and he wouldn't lose any of his support. You laugh at the time, and then we look at Donald Trump's popularity today with his base, and he's as popular as ever, Bruce. As popular as ever.
Yeah, you know, one of the things when you talk about the immigration fight, you know, Tom Homan, who's going to be his man behind the immigration fight, basically said, look, you know, when we go into the federal workplaces, there are people who don't have criminal records, who are American citizens, who are here legitimately, and they're going to be collateral damage, and that's okay. I mean, that's not okay.
Yeah, you know, there's a couple things relative to the immigration debate as well. The first thing is, and this is hard to convince people of, because we have tragic, high-profile incidents of like young women like Lake and Riley, who was killed by somebody who was here illegally. The reality of it is when you talk to anybody, conservative or liberal, who actually works in criminal justice, rates of crime are lower in communities of undocumented workers, Bruce. Why? Because they don't want to stand out. They don't want to get caught. They want to be in the United States, albeit illegally. And that's not the preferred way that any of us would agree that we would want somebody to come into the United States. However, the reality of it is there's more crime being committed on individuals who live in those communities than what those communities of individuals are perpetrating back to us, okay? The other aspect here is one we just cannot get away from, is that illegal immigrants in the United States, Bruce, do the work that Americans here do not want to do. They're doing the hard labor jobs. They're working in construction. They're working in home health care. They're taking care of our children, okay? And by the way, this is nothing new to the United States. These are the jobs that through waves of immigration going back from Asia to Eastern Europe, that immigrants have always performed in the United States. So just saying that you're going to do the mass deportation of people who are here illegally, what kind of impact will that, and I know you raised the specter of tariffs that we'll talk about, but what kind of impact will that actually have on our economy when a lot of these jobs right now and a lot of these employers who are not paying competitive wages are then forced to pay competitive wages because their labor pool has been deported?
Yeah, people don't understand what the impact on the economy is going to be, and I wasn't going to get into this, but I'm going to bring it up. You know, when you talk about the H-1B visas, you know, and these are more skilled jobs, people don't understand about the impact of that either when it comes to, you know, the tech sector and things like that, and what's happening in you know, places like out in Silicon Valley and things, and those jobs that are being replaced and who they're bringing in, and that's a whole nother argument.
Yeah, well, and the whole reason that program was created was to basically shore up labor shortages in the United States. We didn't have enough domestically made experts in these varieties of fields, so we basically created this program in order to bring people from other nations. Now, if you want to say, you know what, the United States needs to ramp up its own education, we need to better train Americans to fill these positions, I think you could have that conversation. I think that's an intellectually honest conversation. But just to suggest that you're going to start deporting people or limiting people coming in the United States, which interestingly enough, Bruce, some of Donald Trump's closest advisors right now, Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk, they have a very different opinion about immigration and H-1B visas than the president does.
Well, you know, Donald Trump says he never said he was against H-1B visas, and now he's changed his tune on that. Yeah. And, you know, the MAGA rank and file is just not whole happy. That's, like I said, a whole nother argument.
That's right. And in some ways, this is actually one place where you can actually say that Donald Trump may be slightly out of step with his base. Mm-hmm. If you're going
the MAGA rank and file is not happy.
Right, that is correct, because of what he said with the language that he's used, and now he's looking at it and he's saying, oh my goodness, well, you know, and by the way, how many people has Donald Trump employed through the H-1B visa program? Many. We know that for a fact. Yeah.
And how many lower skilled people does he employ in his hotels and things? I mean, we're getting off track. Right. All right, let's talk about crime. Go back to that. Sure. Trump proclaimed repeatedly that crime is at an all-time high. Look at the statistics. They show the homicide rate is plummeting across several of the nation's major cities. Violent crime was down broadly. We just did a story on News4Jax that the murder rate in Jacksonville was down, according to JSO Sheriff T.K. Waters. Once again, he is manipulating the truth, but people don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, first of all, excellent point, and congratulations to Sheriff Waters and for Mayor Deegan, and for, you know, basically Mayor Deegan starting her first term and T.K. Waters starting his second term as sheriff. Congratulations to them both. It's been something, Bruce, that you and I have discussed often, this whole idea of the crime rate in Jacksonville, and to see any kind of uptick in public safety is refreshing, and it's something that we really need to celebrate and we need to thank our leadership for, okay? Hopefully it's sustainable, by the way, Bruce, and this becomes a trend, not an outlier, okay? Relative to what you're talking about the United States, it is a fact that crime is down. Now, why don't people feel that way? Well, Bruce, if you turn on the news every day, whether you're a faithful Channel 4 viewer like I am or whatever your news network, the nature of news is to cover things that are happening in the community, which sadly are bad. Fires, crime, impacts of climate change, burglary. You know, these are the things that the news has always covered versus maybe in your D block, you've got one good story about a firefighter saving a cat from a tree at the end, okay? So it's hard anecdotally for people to realize that yes, crime is actually coming down when they're turning on their news, they're sitting in their living room, and all they continue to see are images of violence, and all they can see are images of wildfires and everything else. And by the way, this isn't an indemnification of the news media. You guys have a responsibility to cover what's going on, and unfortunately, that always it looks tragic versus what's actually going on in our world. You know, we still have sunny days, we still have walks on the beach, we still have things that are positive in our lives, but it's not the nature of what you guys do.
Right, but it's because people lack context, perspective, and focus, and if they look around, you know, their neighborhoods, they'll go, oh yeah, most of my neighbors aren't, you know, victims of crime, they're not subject to crime. Right. And you're still gonna write me, and you're gonna go, there he goes blasting Trump again, there he is liberal media, there he is mainstream media, and he's blasting Donald Trump, and there he is, he's saying he's manipulating the truth. Well, he is, that's a fact. Let's talk about the hacking incident and China's involvement. Look at Mr. Trump's approach. Political analysts say it threatens to inflame already intense relations between the U.S. and the Chinese. He is padding his administration with people hawkish on China and threatening new tariffs on one of the United States' biggest trading partners. Does Trump have to tread lightly here?
Well, of course he has to tread lightly. I mean, as soon as if Donald Trump is successful with his tariff proposal across the board, you know, I believe, you know, with his threats against Canada, his threats against Mexico, okay? And I think we need to look at them equally. For the huge size of China as a trading partner, he's also made the same threats. I mean, literally, Trump's language and Trump's rhetoric led to the resignation of Justin Trudeau, a 10-year prime minister in Canada, because the Canadian people didn't believe that Trudeau or his people didn't think he was taking the threats of Donald Trump seriously enough when you look at the Canadian economy. So what I would say is this: when you actually think about what a tariff is, and you actually think about the line that Trump is trying to walk, Bruce, again, we're both Pennsylvanians. We understand the carving out of the industrial base in the United States. We understand with Donald Trump's supporters, a lot of them, they believe in Trump saying that I want to recreate manufacturing jobs in the U.S. We want to repatriate these industries to the United States. But at what cost? Are we all going to be willing to go out and spend 25% more on everything that we're currently buying? That's an artificially created inflation, Bruce. And we're coming off of a period of soaring inflation where many political pundits and experts will tell you that one of the reasons why Vice President Harris lost is because she couldn't address the inflation problem that we had in the last couple of years of the Biden administration.
She didn't articulate policy at all.
No, well,
specific policy.
She did,
well enough.
But the other problem with the Harris campaign, Bruce, that, you know, looking back to, is the things that she did articulate were so technocratic that they were impossible for the American people to actually get their minds wrapped around. If you're Donald Trump, one of the things that makes Donald Trump rhetorically so excellent, he can just say things like, I'm going to give you a tax cut. It's going to be a big, beautiful tax cut. Everybody hears that. Everybody understands that.
It's plain simple.
What would a Democrat do? They would come out with some sort of means-tested technocratic program on a sliding scale of benefits that the American people wouldn't be able to understand or get their minds wrapped around. So I hate to say it, but a lot of the Democrats' problem in this last election, and a lot of the losses they suffered, were really communication issues. That
was Joe Biden's problem. You know,
Yes.
he talked about things that were going on, you know, at the level of the Fed, this and that. He didn't talk about what was going on, you know, at the grocery checkout line and things like that. And that was, you know, basically where he lost America.
Very, very difficult. I mean, Joe Biden, obviously, I mean, we've talked in the past about his age and the fact that he was experiencing a cognitive decline, which is impossible for anybody to deny. But also, Bruce, the fact that Joe Biden hasn't been living in the real world outside of D.C. for 50 years. I mean, he's very, very insulated from that conversation, you know, those kitchen table conversations that a lot of pundits like to talk about. How are we going to make our ends meet at the kitchen table? Well, Joe Biden's been as removed. I mean, I would argue, even though the scale of the is different, he's been as removed from those conversations as Donald Trump has. Yeah. You know, there's no connectivity there with the American people.
And by the way, if you listen to this particular program that we're doing right now long enough, what you're going to find out is that what we're saying is what Donald Trump says and what he means are two very different things. Yeah. Back to China. Mr. Trump did invite the Chinese President Xi Jinping to his upcoming inauguration to try and smooth relations, but Xi turned him down. What do you read into that?
Well, I think it would be obviously unprecedented for somebody like Xi to come to, but I know he is sending top-level delegation here to D.C. to attend the inauguration. He's just not attending himself. Listen, this is, Bruce, where I probably find myself a little bit maybe separated from you or from other analysts or political science folks. I think any kind of detente that Donald Trump can engage in isn't necessarily a bad thing. I was very outspoken, for example, when he actually went to Korea and he met with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah,
and I don't necessarily disagree with you.
Right.
Go ahead, and then I'll...
Sure. So for me, if you, as long as Trump is approaching this honestly, altruistically, he's looking at what's best for his administration, but for the American people, I don't think a dialogue with Xi is a bad thing at all. I think, as a matter of fact, I think that we need to look at the United States and look and understand the fact that with their population growth, their economic surge, the fact that China has access to a lot of rare earth materials that we need for future technology and green technology, I think that there's a lot to be said for not looking at China as an adversary and looking at China as a future partner. Now, the problem with Donald Trump is he is in a political party that would greatly disagree with that. As much as the Democrats have been opposed to Putin, the Republicans are opposed to China, okay? They look at Taiwan as being the next great threat that we have in the world. I think that Donald Trump, again, even if by accident, if he can find a way to olive branch to Xi, to tie us together globally, I think that there's only positives can develop from that versus the negatives that people always assume is going to happen.
And I'm not going to disagree with you. And you know, there's word that he's trying to bring Putin to the table and have a dialogue with him. And I think that would be fantastic.
Listen, what would be the worst thing that happens? Peace breaks out? I mean, literally. I mean, Ukrainians and Russians stop dying.
Yeah.
We actually restore, world global markets that have been impacted by the lack of Russian fossil fuels, the lack of Ukrainian wheat, and we save human lives. I mean, again, look at the situation. I know we're not to talk about this today with Israel, with Gaza, with Netanyahu. I mean, if Donald Trump, just by the fact that he's taking office next Monday and he becomes the president again, if he can get on the phone with Bibi Netanyahu and say, this ends, we're not doing this anymore. Both Israeli lives and the lives of Palestinians are precious, and the United States is not going to do this. Again, peace breaks out.
Right. And the question is, what's given up?
Right.
Well,
for sure.
And in the end,
And these are nuanced things, even with Ukraine. Right. Like how much of that territory, because Russia's going to want to keep a lot of the territory they seized in the Donbass. How much? Where do you divide out these lines? Right. Will the Russians have to pay any kind of price, or will they just become the de facto victors in this war, which they escalated when they invaded the eastern part of the Ukraine? Okay.
Right.
Those are things that will have to be left determined. If anything, despite the fact, and I say this again, of all of the cabinet appointments that we've talked about, Senator Marco Rubio here in Florida is a lot more hawkish than my foreign policy is. He's very much a saber rattler. However, in also some ways, Marco Rubio is a reasonable actor. So I think that him taking over as Secretary of State versus somebody, say, like a Tulsi Gabbard or a Pete Hegseth or RFK Jr. or a Matt Gaetz or some of the other cabinet selections that Trump's had, I think that Marco Rubio would represent, albeit conservative, some stability in that very, very important office.
Compared to many of the other actors? Definitely.
Yes.
And
yes.
You and I talked about something actually, before we came out here in the studio. We talked about what's going on in the negotiations to release some of the Israeli hostages, the talks between Israel and Hamas. And the bottom line is that Joe Biden is trying to go ahead and, win their release and broker some sort of a ceasefire and peace. Maybe it's short term, maybe it's longer term. And, Joe Biden would like to get the credit for it, but that Donald Trump is going to sweep in and say, well, it's because I'm coming into the office. But in the end, does it really matter if those hostages win their freedom? Who gets the credit for it? It's kind of like what you said, Jimmy Carter, after the Iranian hostage situation, it was like, okay, well, Jimmy Carter's out of office, and now Ronald Reagan can go ahead and take the credit. It doesn't matter because they win their freedom, and there's finally some semblance of peace in the Middle East. Yeah,
that's right. And the other thing about the Biden administration trying to make this play in the last week of its existence, Bruce, on the left wing, and this a lot of your viewers maybe don't follow this, but on the left wing of the Democratic Party, Biden's legacy in Israel is going to be a poor one. Because a lot of those individuals looked at the Biden administration and they said, again, and this may not be popular with everybody, but I'm speaking for the left wing of the Democratic Party now, not necessarily you or I, that the Israeli response to what happened in Gaza was disproportionate. You've got over 100,000 civilians now, Bruce, men, women, children who are dead. The Biden administration enabled this to happen, okay? A lot of people have speculated that the reason why Kamala Harris received 10 million less votes than Joe Biden did, while the Trump vote number was almost equal from 2020 to 2024, a slight uptick, Kamala Harris hemorrhaged 10 million votes. A lot of people, when you look at the enthusiasm from the progressive left of the Democratic Party, a lot of them stayed home. And one of those reasons is because what they consider to be Biden's foreign policy in the Middle East. Whether you or I agree with that,
Afghanistan.
Correct. Well, and then withdrawal from Afghanistan,
right.
which, again, in my opinion, did we get out of Afghanistan poorly? Yes. Did we need to get out of Afghanistan? I would argue, yes. But how we got out with the death of Marines, with the death of civilian lives, with, Bruce, the images of people literally hanging off airplanes on the tarmac, it was very, very similar. And one of the things that, if you look at the photographs, it was very, very similar to the American exit from Hanoi back in 1975 when we finally left South Vietnam. The same kind of imagery, which the rest of the world, or a lot of critics would say, look at these examples of American failure. Okay, here they are.
But it was an American.
Yeah. Here they are leaving South Vietnam and the South Vietnamese allies that we had to the perils of North Vietnam, and here we are leaving our Afghanistan allies to have the political party who's now in charge of Afghanistan.
Right.
Yeah.
In Kabul, yeah. That unfortunately will be Joe Biden's legacy.
The Taliban, Bruce. The Taliban.
It's not what he wants.
Taliban, right.
When politics and power continues, Donald Trump has a radical approach to things with Congress, lumping things into what he calls one big, beautiful bill. Will it fly with lawmakers, or will it wind up in a bruising political melee? That and more when politics and power continues. Welcome back to Politics and Power. Bruce Hamilton, along with political analyst Daniel Cronrath. Now, concerning some of the other issues on the day one agenda, Donald Trump and his Republican cronies are plotting a radical policy agenda in what's been classified as one big, beautiful bill, even though Trump now says he doesn't care if it's one or two bills. Is that doable? Is it just letting the stage for one big, prolonged political battle on Capitol Hill play out?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Bruce. The trend in modern politics has been, rather than just trying to accomplish something with an individual piece of legislation, let's put together a huge piece of legislation, some sort of omnibus legislation, which often, involves a lot of different things which are otherwise unrelated to one another. Now, why is this a strategy? The strategy is because if you can provide something for everybody in a bill, they're going to be willing to hold their noses at something they don't like in order to get something that they do like passed within that piece of legislation. I think the biggest challenge that Trump is going to have, and we've already seen this with the re-election of Speaker Johnson when he was chosen by the Republican conference to become the Speaker again, is there's very little room for any kind of dissent within the Republican Party. In order to get Trump's agenda through, they cannot afford to lose the Lauren Boeberts or the Marjorie Taylor Greens or the individuals who, for whatever reason, because of their own congressional districts, which are uber conservative, that they can't go along with the Johnson agenda, which in fact will be the Trump agenda. Speaker Johnson is going to be working in the House to fulfill the wishes of his Republican president. There's no doubt about that. But again, there's no room for dissent. There's no opportunity. In some ways, Matt Gaetz being out of Congress, ironically enough, is good for President Trump, because if you look back at the previous administration and then under Speaker McCarthy, Matt Gaetz was one of the leaders of the little faction within the conference, who always tried to undermine the Republican agenda. So at the end of the day, will Trump be able to get a lot of this through? I think he will, okay? But in reality, the bigger you make that package, the more omnibus, yes, you're trying to allure to people, but the more you're going to have things that also stand out, Bruce, which are going to be non-starters for some of the members of his own conference. It's going to be challenging.
Yeah, you and I are going to talk about this on Inauguration Day, because you'll be with me on the morning show at 7:15. But when you look at the makeup of the Senate, you do have some senators who are up for midterm elections. You have others who are going to term out at the end of 4 years. And while Donald Trump may think that they're loyal, they've got their own concerns right now, and that loyalty may come into question. And when Donald Trump thought that he had a mandate from the voters, which he did not, he may not have the mandate and loyalty that he thinks from those senators.
Well, Bruce, we talked about this a little bit before the show, but here's the thing, with Donald Trump now being the second president who's been elected to non-consecutive terms in American history, while Trump is going to use his first 100 days to push out his agenda, what he believes he have a mandate, as you suggested, the reality is Donald Trump is also already a lame duck. All right. And there are going to be people within the Republican Party who are speculating ahead. What does the party look like in 2027? What does the party look like in 2028? Who's going to emerge of this? Will this become the party of J.D. Vance? Will this become the party of Marco Rubio? Will this become the party of Nikki Haley? Which, if that would be the case, it would be taking a turn back to the more traditional days of the Republican Party. So what I think you might see, and if you're somebody who does not fancy the president, this would be something that you could be interested in and maybe hopeful about, is I think that you're going to see Republicans, the later and further that this administration goes on, the less supportive they're going to become to the president. Who are we talking about, Bruce? We're talking about the people who ideologically most of your viewers are probably already familiar with. Your Lisa Murkowski's from Alaska, your Susan Collins from Maine. You know, the people right now that this president really needs to just pinch their noses again and confirm a lot of his more controversial cabinet choices. I think that you're going to see as the administration goes on and they're looking at their own political futures, they're imagining a Republican Party without Trump, then you're going to see more dissension. But I think right now, I think in the very, very beginning, you're going to see a very, very unified Republican Party. That will wane. It will wane because they will have an eye to the future and they will say, we don't want to be on record having done X, Y, or Z when the Republican Party, again, and this is in their speak, comes back to a greater state of normalcy versus what the Trump years were for the party.
But here's what he's got going for him. He's got a Democratic Party that doesn't know what it is, what it wants to be, or where it's going.
Well, that's very, very true. The only thing that we know is that the Democratic Party, and this was demonstrated, again, I still say that the leader of the Democratic Party in the House is Nancy Pelosi, despite Congressman Jeffries being in the actual leader position. If you don't believe that, just look at what the leverage that she pulled with a lot of the committee assignments, denying Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example, the ability to chair the Oversight Committee, backing up an individual literally right now who is battling esophageal cancer, rather than going with AOC, who's arguably one of the most popular people in the Democratic Party.
That surprised a lot of people.
Sure. Point of it is that when it comes to opposition to Trump, the Democratic Party is really right now probably more united than they ever have been. From the very, very center of the party all the way out to Rashida Tlaib and other members of the squad, they have found a way to coalesce around and really execute a very, very strong opposition. You're not going to see a lot of votes peel away from the Democrats when they're trying to vote opposite of President Trump in that regard. So that means what? It means 3, 4, 5 Republicans in the House don't vote the way that they need them to, and they're going to have gridlock. They're not going to be able to get the agenda passed.
But they still have a lot of work to do before the midterms.
Who's that? The Democrats?
Democrats.
Oh my goodness, yes.
As far as the electorate is concerned, they have to create a situation where they get the kind of turnout they need, looking forward even to 4 years from now, to coalesce and to bring about some consensus among the electorate.
Yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party's coalition right now, the brand is damaged, not just in Florida, but nationally. It's in a really, really bad way. Their coalition has shaken. I mean, there's been a lot written about this, Bruce. I will still contend that if you're going to build a coalition like the Democrats have, you have to appeal to a broader base of people, and that used to be the working class in the United States. This isn't speculation now. We know, we can look at the data from these last 2 elections for President Trump. He's been slowly whittling away to the Republican Party, a base which is unnatural for the Republican Party, because it's not like the Republicans are any better for the working class than the Democrats are.
No.
But if neither party, in the perception of the working class, if neither party is helping them, then why would you vote for a party who maybe on social issues is out in front of where you are?
Right. And, this jogged my memory. I just saw John Fetterman from Pennsylvania walking down the aisle there, and he is backing them on their immigration.
Was he wearing a suit or wearing a hoodie?
Anyway,
the Federal.
He had a jacket on. I didn't see the hoodie.
Fair enough.
All right, so let's talk about what The Guardian called the prospect of months of potentially bruising political infighting needed to secure this one big beautiful bill, 2 big beautiful bills package. Sure, the GOP has a majority in both the House and Senate, but it's very slim, as we've been talking about. So, if there is a lot of infighting on Capitol Hill, that's not going to go very well for Donald Trump.
No, I mean, the first thing that you're going to want to have happen if you're the president and if you're Susie Wiles and if you're any of Trump's little circle, you don't want any of these fights taking place in public. Yeah, you would like this to be conversations which are taking place behind the scenes.
And they are right now.
Yeah, right, and that's where you want them to stay. You don't want there to be any divisions. You certainly don't want this making into what they would consider to be liberal media. Obviously, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times are going to be sitting and waiting for anything that they can, which they can publish then, which shows any kind of division within the Republican ranks. I do think that you're going to see, Bruce, a push to get this done in the first 100 days. In American political culture, presidents fancy that this is the opportunity because they're coming off an election. Believe it or not, when you look at presidential history, Donald Trump's popularity and his approval ratings will never be higher than what they are right now coming into office. They won't be. You got the inauguration, you have people unified, you're swearing in the president, it's bipartisan, you're going to see former presidents there. Also, too, in this unique context, too, you're probably going to see an uptick in polls because of the Carter funeral. There's a President Trump going there, sitting by former President Obama.
Oh, would I have loved to have been a fly on the wall?
Hard not for, if you're a Republican or if you're a Fox News watcher or a Newsmax watcher or a Channel 4 watcher, to see that there was a camaraderie there. I mean, both of these guys are in a rare air club, right? They're former presidents of the United States. But all of that projects to Donald Trump actually seeing a bump in his approval rating. You're never going to have it higher than when you first come into office. okay? Also, too, the other thing that we could talk about is, can the Democrats, to fully answer your question, we know that historically at the midterm election in 2 years that there's going to be an uptick in Democratic support. You could very, very easily see the Democrats win the House back because of how narrow those margins are. What can the Republicans get through? They're going to be pressed. They're going to want to get it done. Just like Obamacare was able to get through the Affordable Care Act in 2009 and 2010 before he lost his majorities. Just like Donald Trump was able to get his tax cuts through in his first term before he lost control of the House to Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in 2018. You're going to see a big push to get these things done, because the reality is, if you and I were betting folks, I would suggest to you that the Democrats will win back the House in 2026, despite their dysfunction.
And let me quote the inimitable James Carville here, come the midterm elections and everything else. It's about the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if we've got these tariffs, if we've got, you know, some other things that are happening, if the whole immigration situation turns the tables topsy-turvy when it comes to the labor force and things like that, and the economy goes south, then Donald Trump's popularity ratings are going to go south too.
Well, yeah, and then, you know, the other thing that the Democrats really need to do, Bruce, is they need to stop what I would consider to be, if you look at the traditional metrics that we use to measure the health of the economy, you know, GDP, if you look at the debt and deficit and a lot of these, they don't make a lick of difference to somebody who's out there trying to pay their bills, Bruce. So having Paul Krugman or having Joe Scarborough on MSNBC on Morning Joe go out and basically call the American people stupid because they don't realize how great this economy is, that's a political loser. You can't look at the people voting for your candidate and say, you're wrong, the economy's great, when, you know, they're part of America that has $1.6 trillion in credit card debt, Bruce. You can't do those kinds of things. So hopefully the Democrats in 2 years, if you're a Democrat supporter, if you like to vote for Democrats, they learn these lessons. They start preaching the message of kitchen table economics again. They find somebody who's better equipped to articulate what that message is, and they're able to make inroads in the next election. So that would be the Democratic strategy. Yeah, and by the way, the Senate's not going to get really any better for the Democrats moving forward, because they're going to have to defend. They still have states to defend that are going to be very difficult for them to defend. And the other thing is, too, is that, you know, the whole idea of like having Manchin, even though he was squishy and at the end of his career became an independent, or John Tester in Montana, a very conservative state, but having him as a Democrat in the Senate, those seats aren't going to be going back to the Democratic Party anytime soon, Bruce, in either one of those states. So, you know, then you're putting yourself in a position where you have to hold Georgia. Very, very tough. Despite what, you know, Raphael Warnock was able to accomplish when he ran for the Senate, and of course the tumultuousness of that election cycle, those are going to be very difficult seats for to defend. So where do you see opportunities for the Democrats? Certainly in the House of Representatives is where they could gain back power.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because I do think, back to the point, there's going to be a lot of political infighting. I don't think that things are going to go smoothly. I think that the timetable is going to get held up. Does that put House Speaker Mike Johnson in an almost untenable position?
You know, I got to tell you, I got to hand it to Mike Johnson. He's done a better job than I think most of us thought he would do, considering the dynamics that are at play. Coming in after Kevin McCarthy, he has found a way, Bruce, to, you know, what's the expression, herd cats? Because he is herding 219 Republican cats, is what he's successfully doing. And
they didn't scratch his eyes out.
No, and they have not scratched his eyes out, and he's finding a way to get it done against all expectations. I mean, the other thing, too, is that, you know, prior to him coming on the scene, I'll make a very, very honest acknowledgement to you. I didn't really know who Mike Johnson was. He really existed in kind of a position of anonymity within the House of Representatives, despite the fact that he had been in leadership for a long time.
That's how he got elected.
Yes, he comes up, he's able to take the reins, and now he's doing, you know, if I were a Republican, I would have to look and say, you know, Speaker Johnson is really doing a good job of keeping our conference together. Now it's incumbent upon him, can he continue that to try to execute President Trump's agenda? Will he be able to have success? Right now, I would say I wouldn't bet against him. I mean, he's already doing a better job than I thought possible after McCarthy was excised from the chamber.
Well, you know, I think the thing with Mike Johnson
Not excised from the chamber, but leadership.
No, I know what you mean. You know, you could see Kevin McCarthy sweat. Mike Johnson, you never see him sweat, to use an old cliche. I mean, he's a very cool cucumber.
Yeah.
He plays it very cool.
Yeah, I would not want to play Texas Hold'em against Speaker Johnson.
No,
because
he's got a poker face.
Yeah, he has a poker face. He makes no expressions. He's very, very directed in every movement that he makes. He's very purposeful.
With all the legislation that they've lumped into these bills, how much of it is going to hold up? Those in the know say there are a lot of things in there that will be politically contested.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me, I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to break out components of this bill. I don't think they're going to be able to push the whole thing through, but that obviously is their desire. As we've said before, that has become the desire in modern politics. Why? Because you can pass an omnibus piece of legislation, which are able to get in less popular things that satisfy a certain fringe of the group. The other thing, Bruce, and I would say this because you and I have had this conversation, and I would like to see that the House, and this is very unpopular with the American public and the American taxpayer, is getting back to the era where we actually used earmarks. A lot more legislation, Bruce, that was bipartisan got done back in the old days when you could say have a councilwoman, or excuse me, a Congresswoman, Corinne Brown, who would give Republican support for a piece of legislation because she knew that she could also, in that bill, bring money back to Jacksonville through earmarks. It was a more collegial time. We look at it, we say, oh, well, what a waste of taxpayer money, is the common trope. Not being able to, just have these clean bills and getting these riders attached. But Bruce, it was also a way that things got done for a very, very long time, and it promoted a kind of bipartisanship in the chamber that we no longer have.
But nothing's gotten done on Capitol Hill in years now.
Nothing. But I would say if you look back and you study the years, it almost coincides exactly with when earmarks disappeared, when they stopped the process of being able to whip up support or gain collective support, because there was something in that bill which would benefit your district, benefit the people, that you could go back and you were Corinne Brown, you could say, you know what, I did support the Republicans on this bill, and by the way, I brought back $1.2 million for X or Y, and able to generate support in the community, and then you got the legislation passed. Since that's gone away, and by the way, you can make the principal argument that they should never come back. However, I would argue that if you're looking for a more cooperative and collegial Congress, bringing back earmarks would be one way that you could accomplish that.
But is that going to happen when you've got people on Capitol Hill who are still talking about political retribution? I mean, don't live in the past, look to the future?
I would hope that's a minority of people. I really would.
Jim Jordan?
Yeah. Well, Jim Jordan's going to Jim Jordan. That's just who he is, and he's going to take off his jacket and he's going to throw fits. So that's just who Congressman Jordan is. But I think that
the wrestling coach.
The wrestling coach. Yeah. That is correct. I feel like that's a minority opinion. Hopefully we can push through on this. The problem is, Bruce, and I hate to say this, but the Sunday morning talk shows, and again, I always feel like I'm beating up on my media brother.
No, you're absolutely right.
But there's a reason why people like Lindsey Graham and Jim Jordan get booked, because they're out there.
Although I do think, I got to say, I think Lindsey Graham has moderated a little bit in recent days.
I don't know, man. He's so back and forth on almost every issue. The only thing I can guarantee you is that he is definitely... Lindsey Graham has been wanting to go to war with Iran since I've been old enough to follow Lindsey Graham. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. He remains to this day a steadfast hawk. Let's also remember, too, that Lindsey Graham, after January 6th in 2021, came out and lambasted Donald Trump publicly, only about a month later to reverse his decision and decide
that... He does what's ever politically expedient.
Yes. But my point of it is that when we're looking at this and we have feelings of cynicism or we have feelings that we're downtrodden, I think we need to remember that the people that we're seeing come out as public spokespeople are being selected because they have an agenda which is not in line with everybody else's agenda.
Oh, yeah, but look, what did J.D. Vance say the other day when it came to the January 6th rioters? Well, look, if they were involved in violence, they were involved, with guns, then, yeah, they shouldn't be exonerated. Mm-hmm. A voice of reason, J.D. Vance, not just buying into the whole Trump trope of everybody should just get carte blanche.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, you agree with that assessment from the future vice president, that that's the way to handle it?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, there were some people, I look back at the events of the day, there were some people there, Bruce, who had the intent of committing violence and did. And they should be held accountable.
Yes.
There were other people there who were just supporting their president, and really they kind of, to me, just looked like LARPers. They were dressed up like playing Shakespeare in the park. They didn't know what to do with themselves. They supported their president, but they weren't involved in assaulting a Capitol Hill.
They got caught up in what?
They got caught up. They weren't involved in assaulting a Capitol Hill police officer. They didn't enter the building. Those individuals, I would agree with the vice president coming in. Those individuals should be looked at differently than people who committed wanton acts of violence, and we know who they are. They should not be pardoned.
Exactly. Things are not black and white is the situation, and you handle each situation individually. I also don't think that, I don't believe that Donald Trump is going to go ahead and issue a blanket pardon. I didn't think that Joe Biden should have issued Hunter Biden a blanket pardon. I think that was the wrong thing to do.
It's interesting. I would tell you, Bruce, I actually, if I were Joe Biden, I probably would have pardoned my son.
However, I didn't say not to pardon him, son. I said a blanket pardon.
Oh, sure. Right, for all of Hunter's alleged crimes. So just a blanket. But the other thing, where Biden made his mistake, which I think he needs to be held accountable for, is that he initially said he would not pardon his son.
Yes.
And then when the case started going south, that's when he did issue the pardon.
Right, he should have just said, I don't know what I'm going to do, and left it at that.
Yeah, it would be very difficult, though, for anybody in their lives who had a children to look at their child and not pardon their own child. That would be very, very difficult. But I think the problem is, again, he told the American people something different than he did, and that's the challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
But isn't that what politicians do?
Oh, every day, man, every day.
Always a pleasure, and I'll see you on Inauguration Day at 7:15 in the morning.
Yes, sir. Martin Luther King Jr. Day as well.
Absolutely. A day of service. So let's keep that in mind, because that's what America should really be about, a day of giving back and a day of service. It is going to be an interesting next 4 years. I do want to hear from you. I do appreciate what you have to say, and I do hope that if you listen to this show, you listen to what was said and not what you think was said. Politics and Power. You can revisit this show on demand anytime on the News4Jax YouTube channel and news4jax.com. Have a great day.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.